an Alaska cruise, a bucket list item for many, many people, and it's certainly one of our favorite destinations to cruise to. So what we're going to do today is we're going to give you our best hints, tips, and tricks of how to plan that ultimate Alaska trip. We're going to talk about the itineraries, we're going to talk about ships, we're going to talk about where to depart from, all the things you need to help you plan your Alaska adventure. And then we're going to follow that up with a video covering all the different ports that you can visit on your Alaskan adventure.
Welcome to Living Phase 2.
Hi, I'm Mike.
And I'm Nancy, and we're empty nesters striving to live life to the fullest.
And we are living that full life, reminiscing about cruising through Alaska and sharing our best hints, tips, and tricks to help you plan your ultimate Alaska getaway.
Well, we sure are, friends. And an Alaskan getaway is very different than a typical cruise. Typically, when you think of cruising, you're going to think of warm weather cruising in the Caribbean or other warm locations. It's not the case here in Alaska. Alaska, you're going to go there to enjoy the scenery and in much cooler weather. One of the first things I want to talk to you about, though, is the cost of an Alaskan cruise, because it is going to cost a bit more than in a Caribbean cruise.
Well, yes, I think the way you have to look at an Alaska cruise is a bit of an investment. We don't want to scare anybody away,
right?
But it is going to be much more, if you're just hopping on a ship in Miami and you're tooling around in the Caribbean for 7 days and come back, you can get really inexpensive cruise. You're not going to spend a lot in the ports a lot of times, things like that. But here in Alaska, the cruise itself is going to be a little bit more expensive, usually not crazy, but a bit more expensive. Flying here is an example. If you're going to leave from Anchorage, you've got to take a one-way trip to Anchorage and then quite often take a one-way flight back from Vancouver or Seattle or someplace like that. So the transportation to and from is going to be more expensive. The ports are more expensive. So as an example, if you get off and want to have a meal in port, you remember all those commercials that say prices vary in Alaska and Hawaii. Well, they do vary because they're more expensive. I'll give you one example. There's a place we like to go to called Tracy's Crab Shack in Juneau. Great place to go. If you want to have some really good crab, good seafood, Tracy's is awesome. But if you're going to get Alaskan king crab legs, they're $75 a pound. You're going to pay about $100 a person, to eat here at Tracy's. Now, it's a splurge. You're on your Alaska trip, but you need to be prepared that even, simple restaurants and things you're going to go to are going to cost you more. Shore excursions in general are going to be more expensive here. They're quite often amazing, but you are going to pay a little bit more than you would pay, let's say, on a normal Caribbean or European or other cruises, again, because of the remote destination and the limited amount of tour operators that can take shore excursions to different places.
And of course, you're going to want to bring home that something special. And so just take note, souvenirs are also more expensive in Alaska.
Like your nice shirt you have here.
That's right. Well, all that said, friends, we do not want to scare you in this video. We just want you to be prepared so you can go on that great Alaskan trip without the stress.
Well, one of the first things you're going to have to decide as you're planning your Alaska getaway, your Alaskan cruise, is the itinerary. What do you want to see? Where do you want to leave from? Where do you want to come back to? Well, there's a few things that are going to really impact that decision. And one of them, let's talk a little bit about a thing called the Passenger Services Act. So this is kind of an important thing for U.S. cruisers. There's a law in the United States that says any ship that's foreign flagged, in other words, not flagged in the United States of America, it must stop at a foreign port if it departs or departs or returns to the United States. So as an example, if you're in Miami and you get on a cruise ship, it can't just go out and come back in to Miami without stopping at the Bahamas or someplace else, because 99% of cruise ships are flagged in foreign ports, like the Bahamas, in Nassau, etc. Well, the same thing in Alaska. If you leave from Seattle, as an example, you have to stop in Canada before you can go back into Seattle. So the way a lot of cruises do is they actually just bypass this by starting in Canada. So they'll start in Vancouver. They'll make the trip up to Alaska, which of course is the United States, stop there, and then come back into Vancouver. And so that's how they get around this Passenger Services Act. So many of the Alaska itineraries that you're going to see are going to be limited, or maybe arranged is a better way to say it, based on the need to satisfy the Passenger Services Act.
So the first thing you need to choose is, are you going to go on a round trip or are you going to do a one-way? Certainly we kind of recommend going on a one-way, because the biggest disadvantage of going on that round trip is you're going up, you're circling around, and you're coming back down, and you're essentially seeing some of the same thing. You're not getting to all the ports, you're not getting up further into Alaska where you're seeing some of the changes there in Alaskan territory. So that's kind of a disadvantage for taking that round trip ticket. Now, if you can take the one-way, which is going to start in Vancouver or Seattle and then go up into, usually it typically ends in Anchorage, or vice versa. It'll start in Anchorage and then end back down in Vancouver or Seattle. That's a really nice way to see more things. But the real disadvantage of your one-way trip is now you've got to fly open jaws, meaning you're flying into one destination and out of another, and typically that's going to be more expensive on your airfare.
Right, versus taking a round trip into just Vancouver or Seattle or something
Right.
like that. Yeah. The other thing is, what you'll find as you're doing your research, there are fewer one-way cruise itineraries than there are the round trip. The round trip really are the majority, where, you know, the cruise line goes from Vancouver, makes a loop through the Inside Passage, makes a few stops, and comes back down, which, by the way, we are going to talk about all those ports in the next video. So when you're talking about ports, be sure to watch for that video that's going to be coming out in about a week after this one comes out. Well, how are they going to make sure they don't miss that video, Nancy?
Friends, you know we appreciate it so much when you like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. We're so happy to have you with us. Thank you.
Yeah, we sure are. So watch for that video with all the ports being the next one. But yeah, either itinerary. The one thing I think we should end this discussion on the itinerary piece is, there really is not a terrible itinerary in Alaska.
That's true.
We've done the round trip, we've done the one way. We do kind of prefer, as Nancy said, the one way, but don't stress over that. If the itinerary that works out with your timing, with the port, with all the things that you're working on, if it happens to be a round trip, you're still going to have a great itinerary. It's Alaska, and these ports and these cruises are just wonderful.
But one more thing to think about before we get off this topic of itineraries is to decide, do you want an itinerary that is more port heavy or more cruise heavy? Typically, if you've got more sea days, more cruise days, you're going to be sailing up into some of the fjords. And so you're going to get to see waterfalls and glaciers and things like that. But you may prefer to stop in the ports and explore Alaska on land through some of the excursions. That is totally up to you. Do keep in mind, though, that if you've got a day when you're going up into the fjords, that can be canceled due to inclement weather, and they do have inclement weather up in Alaska. So, it's kind of a toss-up. But just choose what you think you're going to enjoy the best.
Yeah, I agree. We've done both. In fact, our very last trip we took to Alaska before we went on the Ultimate World Cruise, we were supposed to go into Tracy Arm Fjord, and we were all at 5 a.m. up and waiting to go in the fjord. We kind of got to the mouth of the fjord, and the ship turned around and went right back out. And it was just terrible weather, and we couldn't go. So, you just never know what's going to happen related to that. Now, that said, same thing can happen to the ports. You can have fog in a port and not make it in. But yeah, think about, kind of what you want out of that, out of your Alaska cruise.
Well, the next topic is departure ports, where you're going to leave from to go on this Alaskan cruise. Now, friends, first of all, it is an absolute must you get in there the day before. You absolutely have to, especially if you're coming from the East Coast. It's just an impossibility to get from the East Coast of the United States to Alaska and to catch that cruise on time, you've got to be there the day ahead. So keep that in mind in your planning. And this also applies to the back end of your cruise, that you schedule a day or a night in a hotel when your cruise ship arrives. It's just going to be extremely difficult to get off the cruise ship, get to the airport, and then get back to your destination unless you're catching a red-eye flight.
Right, right. And this is specifically for the East Coast, friends of ours here. Yeah, if you're flying to LA or something in the same time zone,
That's
chances
a
are,
different story.
yeah, chances are you're just going straight down. You can probably make a flight there. But like us, we fly back to Michigan. It really is impossible to catch that flight. And so just think about that. Again, we talked about cost. This is part of that planning to know that you're probably going to need a hotel in the front and a hotel in the back. Well, let's talk about these towns where you might be staying. There are 3 major departure ports that you're going to run into here. Now, that's not to say there aren't others. We're going to talk about the 3 major ones. And let's talk about the first one, which is Anchorage. Now, here's something that's very important. When you depart from Anchorage, the vast majority of cruise lines do not actually leave from Anchorage. They're going to tell you that, but they're actually leaving from Whittier or Seward, one of those 2 places. Now, Seward is about a 3-hour trip from Anchorage. Whittier is about 90 minutes or so. Both are fine ports, but just realize that when you are putting together your plans, which is what we're talking about here, you do have to count for that driving time to get from Anchorage to either Seward or Whittier. Now, there's many places you can go. You can go to Shore Excursion Group. There's Alaska Cruise Transfers. There's all kinds of companies that offer rides from Anchorage out to the cruise port. So it's not a problem, but again, that's another thing you must plan for, and you have to just be ready for because you're going to take that flight to Anchorage, and I've actually heard of people going, "Where's the cruise port?" And they get there, and it's like, "Oh, it's 3 hours to the south. That's where you got to leave from." So again, another reason that you're going to want to go up to Anchorage and spend at least a day. Now, what we'd recommend is spend multiple days. You're going all the way to Alaska. Go out and see Denali National Park. Go out and see the beauty of Alaska. Book what's called a land sea tour with your cruise company, where you get to take a train throughout Alaska and take some time to see that natural beauty of Alaska, because that's why you're going. It's to see this amazing last frontier of the world, as it's called. And don't rush it. Get up there, grab your flight, and get there, land, and then drive 3 hours and get on a cruise ship. Take some time to really see Alaska and budget for that, in your planning. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is Seattle. It's a great city. And again, another wonderful place to go to if you're looking to have a little bit of a tour before. That's a wonderful way to spend that extra day that you plan. Plan 1 or 2 days. Go down to the fish market. Go see the aviation museums. Go see the Space Needle. I mean, all those things are wonderful in Seattle. So you can really make this a nice add-on to your cruise when you go in there. Now, one thing we'll say is Seattle is a very expensive town. So, hotels are going to be expensive, food's going to be expensive. So again, you're going to want to budget for that. As we said, an Alaska cruise is kind of an investment.
Expensive is the theme here.
It is. But, again, you want to plan for that so that it's not a surprise, when you start getting into this Alaska planning. So again, Seattle. Now remember, any itineraries out of Seattle are going to stop in Vancouver or maybe another Canadian town, but primarily Vancouver, and then they're going to make their way up into Alaska. It also adds a little bit of sailing time to get to Alaska because it is further south. So think about that on your itineraries. But Seattle makes for a very nice cruise departure port.
And then the third location where cruise ships will depart from is Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. That satisfies the Passenger Services Act. Vancouver is very crowded, friends. This is a busy cruise port.
Well, this is the most popular Alaska depart and return to port that there is. I guess I should say debarkation, embarkation port, but yeah.
So it's busy. It's very, very busy. It's also one of our least favorite ports. It's confusing. There's a lot of walking, so be prepared for that. You're going from one end of the building to the other. Now you're having to go through immigration here. So that is part of the issue. But when we've been there, there have been 4 and 5 cruise ships that have been disembarking and re-embarking, so it's a lot of people. It's also down where they call Canada Place. So there's shops, there's entertainment, there's a lot going on. And if you're there on a nice day, not only do you have all the cruise ship passengers embarking and disembarking, but you've got all the locals who are coming there to enjoy the location there too.
Yeah, it's funny because Vancouver is actually a nice town to visit.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
And it's just extremely expensive though. So.
The theme. Yeah,
yes.
But of the two we've talked about, Vancouver is definitely the winner as far as the most expensive. I mean, you will pay $200, $300, $400 a night. A $200 a night hotel is cheap in Vancouver if you can find one. So you got to really be prepared there. Meals are expensive. I mean, it is a very costly town, but there's tons of things to see there.
So as a pro tip, friends, though, one of the things we highly recommend is to get a hotel near the port. We were near the airport the last time we were there, and it took 45 minutes just to get into the downtown area, or just to get to the cruise port area. And our cab driver was driving in circles trying to get us to the cruise port where we could actually get on board the ship. Now we happen to be with Mike's parents, and his father has some mobility issues. Otherwise, we would have gotten out of the taxi cab several blocks away and walked. And that's what a lot of people were doing. We just didn't have the ability to do that at that time.
Yeah, it was crazy. Like Nancy said, it took us 45 minutes to drive from the airport to that spot. We were actually then in the cab another half an hour circling, and he tried 3 different ways to get in, and he just couldn't get there. There was so much traffic with 2, 3, what was there, 3 or 4 cruise ships in there.
There were 4 that day.
Thousands of people getting on and off, and it was just, we actually did get off with my father about 2 blocks from the cruise port and had to walk. Luckily, it was downhill, but yeah, all of those things added up. Vancouver's a nice city, great things to see. We're going to talk about that as a port in the next video, but just prepare yourself and get that hotel downtown within a block or 2 of the cruise port. You are going to pay a little extra for that, but the headache will more than pay, the lack of a headache will more than pay for itself when you just get up out of your hotel and take your luggage and walk 2 blocks to go get on the ship. It is absolutely worth it.
Well, now let's talk about which cruise lines actually cruise in Alaska. Surprisingly, you've got a pretty good selection here of cruise lines that are there. Now, friends, we like Royal Caribbean. We've been cruising on them since 1988, and so we're happy with going with Royal Caribbean, but there are many others to choose from. Your lowest cost option of cruising will be on Carnival. Carnival's great for families, and it's going to have your basic onboard offerings.
Yeah, now we've cruised Carnival. They have a good product, and if you're going to Alaska on a budget, if you're spending all that money and your hotel's in Vancouver, Carnival may be a good option for you, especially if you're bringing the kids along.
Your next choice will be Holland America. Now, Holland America also has some really nice onboard offerings. It does have a tendency to be geared a little bit more to the older crowd.
Yeah, but Holland America has been sailing in Alaska for 75 years.
Long time.
Yeah, they're probably one of the most experienced cruise lines when it comes to going to Alaska. So it is a wonderful offering, but if you've got the kids, this may not be the ship you want to pick.
Next, this brings us to Royal Caribbean, and the nice thing here is you've got a couple of different choices in the size of ship that you might want to go on here in Alaska.
Yeah, and in fact, it divides it up amongst ships we would call more family-friendly ships and the more adult-friendly ships. So first of all is the Quantum class ships. So these are like Quantum of the Seas, Odyssey of the Seas, Ovation, those types of ships. And they are great ships for Alaska because they are designed with a lot of interior activities, and they've got tons of activities for kids, everything from bumper cars to water slides to all kinds of things. So the Quantum class ships, they're really large and they're great for families. Now the disadvantage of those is they can't necessarily get into all the little fjords and some of the places that the smaller ships can get into. And that brings us to the Radiance class ships. Now, those of you that followed our trip around the world and our Ultimate World Cruise, that's what we were on, was a Radiance class ship, Serenade of the Seas. And in fact, we're getting ready to go back up to Alaska on her again. Now, this is a smaller ship, not as many activities for families, but wonderful for Alaska because it is a smaller ship. It can go up like Tracy Arm Fjord and go to some of the other areas that the larger ships can't. Royal Caribbean also is a nice moderate price point. So it's not the cheapest, but it's certainly far from the most expensive.
The next is Norwegian. Now, it's also kind of a mid-price ship like Royal Caribbean is, but it's going to have good itineraries. They've got a variety of ships and some nice offerings for families who are going to Alaska.
Yeah, nice alternative if you didn't want to go on Royal, or maybe Norwegian just has a better itinerary, right?
Well, now let's move up in price a bit. Or a lot.
A lot.
You've got your Disney ships that are going to be cruising in Alaska. This is an excellent choice for those of you with children because they have great things for kids to do on board. They've also got some wonderful itineraries. The biggest downfall is their cost.
Yeah, you really, everyone we talk to that cruises Disney, they love the food, they love the shows, the activities, the ships, they love all of it. But, as we go through, you're talking about anywhere from 2 to 3 times the cost of a Royal Caribbean excursions, a Royal Caribbean cruise. So, you get what you pay for in Disney. It is a great experience, but just be ready for the cost if you're looking at doing that.
Well, what about Princess Cruises, Mike?
Well, I think now we're into, I would say almost together, Princess and Celebrity.
Okay.
Now you're into what we call mid upscale. So certainly not high end, but now you're moving up in that price point. And both Princess and Celebrity have wonderful offerings, great ships, excellent food, really good service. You're going to pay that next step up from like a Royal Caribbean or Norwegian, but they do offer a really good product. I know, as an example, Celebrity has some smaller ships that can go into some of those areas, those fjords, go into some of the smaller ports. So that's some advantages you have there. So again, it's a bit what you want to pay for. If you want a little bit of a more upscale adult experience, because you're going to have fewer children on Princess and Celebrity, then you might look at these two.
Now, there are some high-end cruise lines that cruise Alaska as well.
Yeah, you're talking your Silver Sea, your Regent Seven Seas, your Seabourns, those types of cruise lines. Now, these are small boutique ships, I'll almost call them, maybe a little larger than a boutique ship. But these are great, great cruise lines. But you are going to pay 4, 5 times or more than what you're going to pay as an example for a Royal Caribbean ship. Now you're going to get the white glove treatment, wonderful service, great food. Quite often, almost all your shore excursions may be included. So these are high-end experiences if that's what you're looking for, versus maybe more of an adventure style or something with Royal Caribbean likes to call it multi-generational cruising, where you might have more kids, families. Like when we went with my parents, went with the kids and putting everybody together. These are much more of a luxury experience, and you're certainly going to pay for it, but they are an option if that's what you're looking for.
Well, there are other cruise lines that cruise Alaska as well. We've just hit the top ones.
Right, and then there's new ones coming up there all the time.
There are.
So, if we missed it, hey, leave a comment, let us know if you've gone on either one of those cruise lines, or if there's a cruise line that we didn't mention that you really love. We'd love to hear it in the comments.
Well, Mike, we have picked our cruise line. Now we need to pick our ship.
Yeah, and really this boils down to big or small, right? And as you're looking at the different Alaskan itineraries, take a look at those ships. So you've got some very large ships that go into Alaska, and let's use the Royal Caribbean example that we talked about. They have Quantum class ships that go up there. Now these are, certainly not the huge Oasis and Icon class, but they are much bigger than some other cruise lines, some other cruise ships that go to Alaska. But you gain a huge amount of interior space. You gain all kinds of activities for kids and families, and you get specialty restaurants. You get all kinds of things in those ships. But what you're going to sacrifice is being able to go down the narrow channels and being able to go into some of the smaller ports. That's what you get with picking an itinerary or a cruise line with a smaller ship. Now, our advice, we would go the smaller ship 100% of the time. It's really, especially as empty nest travelers, which is what we are, we're normally not traveling with kids. So for us, being on a smaller ship, there's fewer children, there's more special itineraries, you get a little bit more personal service, you get to go into those special places in Alaska. So for us, we would certainly go with the small ship. But if you're going up there with a family and that's what you're bringing the kids and multi-generational cruising, we would say, okay, pick an itinerary or look at a little bit larger ship that's going to have more activities for you on the ship. And a part of that is what we said early on. The weather in Alaska is completely unpredictable. You can be 80 degrees one day and the very next day it can be 30 degrees and snowing. So you want to have a ship that can give you those activities inside versus, the big pool out on the deck that nobody's ever going to be able to use.
Well, now let's talk about when we should go. Alaska kind of opens up, the fringe is kind of end of April to late September. We've hit it before in July to September-ish, and so we've kind of hit the middle of summer versus the fringe season, and both have been great times to go. It's going to be cold up there kind of no matter when you choose. Even in the summertime, it is still going to be chilly, so be prepared for that.
Yeah, and there's advantages to each time you go. So example, if you want to see more bears, salmon runs, things like that, that happens late. That happens more in August and even into September. You're going to have more chances to see bears and things like that. If you're going more June, July, you're probably going to have a little bit better weather. So, there's trade-offs when you go. The one thing we would say is probably avoid those shoulder seasons, right? If you're going, April, May, and if you're way out in September, there's a good chance you may be in snow still up there. And something we've noticed when we've gone up here, especially the last time we went, the cruise lines are extending their Alaska cruising seasons further into those shoulder seasons, because people are wanting to go to Alaska. So the cruise companies are like, let's add one more week. Let's add one more week. Now they're cruising into even to late September. And if you're in Alaska mid to late September, there's really some disadvantages. The first is the towns are closing up. The towns are used to the Alaska cruise season pretty much ending at the end of August, maybe the first week of September or Labor Day. And after that, you go to a town and there's nothing there. I mean, the restaurants are closed, the bars are closed, all the souvenir shops. And also on the front end of that, they're coming earlier and earlier. The towns may not be open yet. So just really watch that. You may find some super cheap deals, out in September in Alaska, but just realize it's going to be cold and some of the activities might be limited at that point. So we'd really recommend holding to the middle itineraries, the middle times there versus, taking a chance out on the edge.
Well, here's something important I think we really should talk about, and that's what room to book. I mean, for us, an interior room is not an option, especially on an Alaskan cruise, because we want to see all the beauty that's there. Now, one thing you might not think about is which side of the ship that you want to book your balcony room on. So friends, if you're going on a one-way itinerary and your ship is going north, you may want to book your balcony room on the starboard side. If you're coming from Anchorage and coming south, you may want to get that balcony on the port side. So keep that in mind. I know on our upcoming Alaskan cruise, we actually have chosen for the first time a balcony on the very back of the ship. So I'm anxious to see how we're going to like that.
Yeah, it's kind of best of both worlds because you can look out both sides, but we're seeing where we've come from, not where we're going to.
Yeah, it's going to be a little different. So.
Yeah. Now, one thing we want to caveat here, this doesn't always hold true for everything, So if you take our advice and say, you're coming out of Vancouver and you booked it on, the starboard side and there's whales on the port side, please don't blame us that you missed the whale, And there's going to be beautiful things on either side of the ship. Again, we don't want to add stress here. If you book port or starboard side on an Alaska cruise, no matter which way you're going, you are going to have a good time. This is just one of those little 10% better things that if you can be on the side of the ship that is more often facing, the Alaska itself, I think you just get a little bit more enjoyment out of it.
I like how you describe that, 10% better. Well, now let's talk a little bit about packing. You're actually going to need to pack more for your Alaskan cruise than you would, for instance, if you're going on a Caribbean cruise. The whole key here, friends, is layers. Layers, layers, layers. You could have weather that's 70 degrees one day and the very next day it'd be 40 degrees. Please also expect rain and maybe snow too.
Yeah.
So you're going to want to bring that raincoat. You're going to want to bring a hat, bring your waterproof shoes, and we would recommend waterproof hiking boots because there's a lot of hiking and walking available for you to do in Alaska and a lot of fun things to see. You want to keep your feet dry. So those are a few tips of things to bring, but those layers are so important.
Yeah, it's important to note that the cruise excursions are not canceled because it rains. We've been out whale watching in the rain. We've gone, hiking. We've gone all kinds of things. They don't stop in Alaska just because it's raining. And so make sure, as Nancy said, I'm not sure you mentioned, rain pants as well. So head to toe. We took a 5-hour hiking adventure up a mountain to a mountain lake in the rain, and we had our waterproof boots, we had our rain pants and our Gore-Tex rain gear, and we were dry the whole time. So make sure you think about this and maybe invest in some really good quality breathable rain gear. It'll make your Alaskan adventure much more enjoyable, and if you really invest in some very expensive gear, it won't rain the whole time you're there.
Right, you'll just ensure that it doesn't rain on you. So in other videos we've mentioned, and I think this is important again, is bring those hiking poles, because Alaska is really an adventure place. You're going to want to do a lot of walking here. We're going to want to walk up to those glaciers and in some of all that natural beauty that there is there. So don't forget those hiking poles. Another thing that's so important to pack here are binoculars, because you're going to see whales. You might see that whale spout or the whale fins off at a distance, and I would also recommend that you bring binoculars for everyone in your party.
Yeah, and in fact, we were on a boat. We had to take a boat out to a hike we were going to go do, and all of a sudden the boat just stopped and he goes, "Look, a bear." And we were able to whip out our binoculars and actually watch a bear catching salmon out of the lake we were on, because it was about 100 yards away, and it was great to have the binoculars. Yeah, you never know, and keep them with you. They do no good in your cabin, so they're a little heavy sometimes to walk around, with them on your neck,
well,
but it's worth
pair.
it.
If you don't own a pair and you want to get some, get a lightweight pair.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Nancy. Binoculars are absolutely worth it. And in addition to those types of things, bring some bug repellent with you. So you'd think, oh, it's cold up there. No, there's still black flies, mosquitoes, gnats, all those things. So make sure you bring some type of insect repellent with you. We recommend either a DEET or a picaridin-based product, so take a look at that. We've got some listed in our Amazon list. We'll put a link to that, in the description. So yeah, don't forget your bug repellent as well.
And remember too, there's going to be more events inside the cruise ship rather than out on the decks, and so we like to dress up going to dinner, so don't forget those formal clothes or the nicer clothes. Just be prepared for all of the activities on board the ship as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really a lot of fun when you're on a cruise to kind of put that tuxedo on and pretend you're James Bond for a day. And so and by the way, if you love to go around in Bermuda shorts and a t-shirt and flip-flops the whole time, you might be a little cold on deck in Alaska, but you do you. We like to dress up and have that cruise experience, so that just means you're going to have to take a little bit more with you to Alaska and pack a little bit more, but we think it's really worth it. Well, friends, that's part 1 of our Ultimate Alaska Planning Guide. We hope this has been helpful, kind of gave you some ideas, gave you some things to think about as you're looking at planning that wonderful trip that you're going to have up in Alaska. Now, part 2 is going to be coming up, and here we're going to actually cover all the different cruise ports that, or at least say the major cruise ports that most of the lines will stop at, so that as you're looking at that itinerary, as you're planning, you can kind of say, oh, do I want to make sure it stops at Ketchikan, or do I want one that skips that but maybe goes to a fjord instead? So we're going to cover all those different cruise ports, and beyond the cruise ports, also a lot of those fjords, glacier sightings, things like that you can see. So you can put those two things together and make this ultimate Alaska bucket list a reality for yourself.
All right, friends, we'll see you very soon. Have a beautiful day. Take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye now.